The air in ITV's Studio 2 was thick with the familiar controlled chaos of live television that Tuesday morning. Floor managers spoke in hushed but urgent tones into their headsets. Camera operators glided their heavy machinery into position with practiced ease, and the live studio audience buzzed with a palpable sense of anticipation. They were about to see a legend. Sir Michael Caine, at 87 years young, was the main guest on Loose Women, a booking that had the production team patting themselves on the back for weeks. He was there to promote his latest memoir, The Long Shot, From Elephant and Castle to Hollywood, and it promised to be a ratings winner, a cozy, charming chat filled with nostalgic anecdotes and that iconic, inimitable voice. On the panel, Ruth Langsford, the consummate professional, sat in the anchor's chair, reviewing her notes with a calm smile. To her left, Janet Street Porter, all sharp angles and sharper wit, was mid-gossip with Colleen Nolan, whose warm maternal presence was a staple of the show. And then there was Carol McGiffin. Seated at the end, she seemed unusually withdrawn, her focus not on the pre-show briefing, but on her own reflection in the dark screen of her monitor. She tapped a perfectly manicured nail against her coffee mug, a rhythmic tick, tick, tick that was just quiet enough to go unnoticed by most, but seemed to betray a coiled tension beneath her placid expression. The countdown began. 10 seconds, ladies, a voice boomed from the gallery. The panelists straightened up, their professional smiles snapping into place. The familiar, upbeat theme music swelled, the lights brightened, and as the final note faded, Ruth Langsford beamed into the camera. Good morning, and a very warm welcome back to Loose Women. We have a packed show for you today, but first we are absolutely thrilled and deeply honored to be joined by a true national treasure. He's a two-time Academy Award winner, a knight of the realm, and the star of over 130 films. Please give the warmest Loose Women welcome to the one, the only, Sir Michael Caine. The audience erupted in thunderous applause as Sir Michael, looking impossibly dapper in a tailored navy suit and crisp white shirt, walked onto the set. He moved with the deliberate, steady gait of his age, but his eyes, twinkling under the studio lights, were as sharp and alert as ever. He shook hands with a beaming Ruth and nodded graciously to the other panelists. "It's my pleasure, Ruth," he said, his voice a familiar, comforting rumble. "Always lovely to be here with you, ladies. Though I must say, you seem to get younger every time I see you." The panel laughed, the audience sighed contentedly, and the interview began precisely as everyone had expected. Ruth guided the conversation with effortless charm. "Michael, the new book, The Long Shot, is just a remarkable read," she began, holding up a copy. "You talk with such honesty about your early days, about being Maurice Micklewhite from South London. There's a wonderful story in there about a casting director who told you that you had a voice for radio and a face for the coal mines." Michael chuckled, a deep, resonant sound. "Oh, I remember him well. A proper gent. He said, 'Son, with that accent, the only way you'll be in a film is if you're robbing a bank.' And I thought, well, that's a start, isn't it? You see, back then, in the 50s, they wanted everyone to sound like they'd just had tea with the Queen. A working-class lad wasn't supposed to be the leading man. But I felt, and I still feel, that our stories, the stories of ordinary people, are just as important. They deserve to be told." Janet Street Porter leaned forward, her expression genuinely admiring. "And thank goodness you stuck to your guns, Michael. You didn't just have a career. You kicked the bloody door down for a whole generation of actors who didn't talk like they had a plum in their mouth. People like Ray Winston, Gary Oldman, they owe you a debt." "That's very kind of you to say, Janet," Michael replied with a nod. "I always believed that if you work hard, if you learn your lines, and you don't bump into the furniture, good things will eventually come. It might take a while, but they'll come." Colleen Nolan chimed in next, her tone warm and gentle. "Michael, you've worked with some of the most incredible leading ladies in history. Sophia Loren, Glenda Jackson, Maggie Smith. In the book, you say the real magic of a scene happens in the other person's eyes. Whose eyes were the most captivating to work opposite?" Michael's face lit up, a genuine smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Oh, that's a question. So many wonderful, wonderful women. Julie Walters, she's just phenomenal. There's no artifice with Julie. You look into her eyes and you believe every single word she says because she believes it. It's a gift. And Maggie Smith, of course. We've done a few films recently, and she has this incredible ability to be hilariously funny and heartbreakingly tragic in the same breath. It's all there, right behind the eyes. I've been incredibly fortunate. I've worked with actresses who bring not just beauty, but such fierce intelligence and depth to their roles. They make you better. They truly do." The conversation was flowing beautifully. It was warm, engaging, and exactly the kind of television the Loose Women audience adored. But at the end of the panel, Carol McGiffin had remained silent, her posture rigid. The rhythmic tapping of her nail against the mug had stopped. Now she simply stared at Michael, her expression unreadable. As he finished his anecdote about Maggie Smith, she finally decided to speak. "That's all very nice, Michael," she interjected. The sudden shift in tone was jarring. It wasn't conversational. It was sharp, with an acidic edge that sliced through the warm atmosphere. A real trip down memory lane. "But can we talk about something a bit more current?" The other panelists froze. Ruth Langsford shot Carol a warning look, a subtle tightening around her eyes that was invisible to the audience, but a clear signal to her co-host. The studio audience, which had been hanging on Michael's every word, fell quiet. Michael Caine, the consummate professional who had dealt with prima donna co-stars and tyrannical directors for 70 years, simply turned his head slightly. He raised a single, quizzical eyebrow and waited. "I'm sorry, Carol. I'm not quite sure what you mean," he replied, his voice still perfectly composed, a model of politeness in the face of her obvious rudeness. Carol leaned forward, a slow, deliberate smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. She seemed to relish the uncomfortable silence she had created. "Well, let's be honest here. We're all about honesty on this show, aren't we?" "Yeah. What, 87 is it? Don't you think it's time to step aside and let some of the younger actors have their moment? I mean, how many more films do you really need to make?" A collective gasp went through the audience. It was a soft, sibilant sound like air leaking from a tire. Ruth Langsford's mouth quite literally fell open. Janet Street Porter looked as if she had been slapped, her face a mask of disbelief. Colleen Nolan just stared, her hand fluttering towards her chest. The floor manager, visible just off camera, could be seen mouthing, "What is she doing?" into his headset. Michael Caine, to his immense credit, didn't flinch. He held her gaze, his expression unchanging. For a moment, he seemed to be studying her like a biologist examining a particularly strange and unpleasant insect. "Well, that's a rather direct question," he finally said, his tone still remarkably even. "Carol, I'm not entirely sure that age should determine whether someone continues to work in a field they love. I'm still healthy, thank goodness. I'm still passionate about the craft of acting, and, thankfully, talented directors still seem to want to hire me." He tried to soften the moment with a slight, self-deprecating smile. "It beats gardening, I can tell you that." But Carol wasn't looking for an off-ramp. She seemed emboldened by the shocked reactions, mistaking stunned silence for captivated attention. She pressed on, her voice growing sharper. "But surely you must realize that you're taking roles away from younger actors? Talented people who need the work far more than you do. You've had your time in the sun, decades of it. Isn't it a bit selfish to keep going?" Ruth Langsford finally found her voice, cutting in with the authority of the show's anchor. "Carol, I really think that's quite enough. Sir Michael is our guest, and that's an incredibly personal and inappropriate question." No, it's all right, Ruth," Michael interjected, holding up a hand. His voice was still calm, but a new note had entered it, a sliver of steel beneath the velvet. He turned his full attention back to Carol. She is entitled to her opinion, even if it is rather poorly expressed. The mild rebuke seemed to flick a switch in Carol. Her face flushed a deep, angry red. Instead of backing down, she doubled down, her voice rising in pitch and volume. "Poorly expressed? I'm just saying what everyone's thinking, but is too polite to say. We're supposed to sit here and applaud these old actors who keep hanging on way past their sell-by date. It's becoming embarrassing, really." Janet Street Porter looked like she was about to physically levitate from her chair with rage. "Carol, what in God's name has gotten into you? This is completely unprofessional and frankly disgusting." "Is it, though?" Carol shot back, turning her glare on Janet. "Or are you just part of the problem? I'm tired of pretending that every little thing these old legends do is wonderful, just because they used to be famous. Let's be brutally honest. Michael Caine hasn't made a decent, memorable film in years." The tension in the studio was now a physical entity. It was thick, suffocating. Camera operators exchanged wide-eyed glances. The audience was shifting uncomfortably in their seats, murmurs of disapproval starting to ripple through the crowd. Michael Caine sat perfectly still for a moment, his hands folded neatly in his lap. His face was a mask of dignified neutrality, giving nothing away. When he finally spoke again, his voice was measured, deliberate, and carried an undeniable weight. "Carol, I'm not entirely sure what has prompted this hostility, but I came here today in good faith to have a pleasant conversation about my work and my life. If you're not interested in having that conversation, then perhaps it would be better for all concerned if I just left." He had given her a lifeline, a graceful, dignified exit ramp to de-escalate the situation. Any reasonable person, any television professional, would have seized it, offering a flustered apology and allowing Ruth to steer the show to a commercial break. But Carol McGiffin, in that moment, proved she was anything but reasonable. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms with a look of pure, unadulterated arrogance. "Oh, please," she scoffed. "Don't try and play the victim and make me the villain here. I'm just being honest. It's what I'm paid for. Ruth Langsford looked desperate, trying to regain any semblance of control. Carol, I am asking you now, as the host of this show, to move on. We have other topics to discuss. No, Ruth, let her finish, Michael said quietly, and the authority in his voice silenced everyone. His eyes had not left Carol's face. They were narrowed slightly now, the friendly twinkle gone, replaced by a focused, analytical glint. I'd very much like to hear exactly what she has to say. Carol's smirk widened. She thought she was winning. She was the center of attention, the one creating the drama. She was the story. Fine, she spat. You want honesty? Here it is. You're a relic, Michael. A charming one, I'll grant you, but a relic nonetheless. Your acting style, that whole never let them catch you acting thing, it's outdated. Your films have become boring, sentimental dramas for the grey pound market. And frankly, watching you try to keep up with modern cinema is like watching a pensioner trying to use a smartphone. It's just painful. It's painful and embarrassing for everyone involved. The studio fell into the kind of profound silence that feels like a physical weight pressing down on everyone present. Even the hum of the air conditioning seemed to have ceased. Janet Street Porter's face had gone completely white, and she was shaking her head slowly in disgust. Colleen Nolan sat with her hand clamped over her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Michael Caine remained perfectly still for several long, agonizing seconds. He slowly unfolded his hands and placed them on the arms of his chair. When he finally spoke, his voice was dangerously quiet, each word precisely enunciated. I see, he said. And you feel qualified to make this professional assessment based on... what exactly? Your extensive, in-depth experience in the film industry? Carol let out a harsh, barking laugh that echoed unnaturally in the silent studio. I don't need to be Martin Scorsese to recognize when someone has overstayed their welcome. I'm a television presenter, Michael. I know about entertainment. And you're simply not entertaining anymore. Carol, stop this right now, Ruth Langford commanded, her professional composure finally shattering completely. The request had become an order. You are behaving appallingly. But Carol was in full flight now, seemingly intoxicated by her own cruelty, deaf to the warnings from her colleagues. Am I wrong, though? Am I? When was the last time Michael Caine made a film that anyone under the age of 60 actually wanted to see? The Dark Knight. That was, what, 15, 16 years ago? Since then, it's just been one forgettable low-budget performance after another, propping up films no one remembers. Janet Street Porter finally found her voice, and it was trembling with fury. How dare you? How dare you speak to Sir Michael Caine like this? He is a knight of the realm. He has won 2 Academy Awards. He has more talent in his little finger than you have in your entire bitter body. Oh, here we go! Carol interrupted, waving a dismissive hand. Trot out the titles and the awards. That's all ancient history. It doesn't mean anything now. What has he done lately that matters? What meaningful contribution is he making to the culture or to cinema right now, besides taking up space that could go to someone with actual talent and relevance? Slowly, deliberately, Michael Caine began to push himself up from his chair. The movement was measured, dignified. He wasn't storming off. He was concluding the proceedings. I think, he said, his voice level, that I've heard quite enough. Have you? Carol challenged, her voice rising to a shrill, goading pitch. Because I'm not finished. You want to know what I really think? I think you keep making these films because you can't bear the thought of becoming irrelevant. You're terrified of fading away. You're clinging to fame like a drowning man clinging to a piece of driftwood, and it is pathetic to watch. The other panelists were now actively trying to intervene. Colleen Nolan reached across the table, her face a picture of distress. Carol, for God's sake, please, you need to stop this. Carol violently shook her arm off. Don't you touch me, Colleen. Someone needs to say this. This is what this show is supposed to be about. Not just sitting here fawning over has-beens because they were good 30 years ago. That's not how the real world works. Having stood up, Michael Caine paused and turned to the other ladies, his dignity a stark, powerful contrast to Carol's screeching invective. Ladies, thank you for inviting me. Ruth, Janet, Colleen, it has been a pleasure as always. He began to turn towards the exit, but Carol, determined to have the last word and cement her own destruction, yelled after him. That's right, Michael, run away. That's what people your age do when they can't handle a bit of honest truth. You shuffle off and pretend the world still revolves around you. The studio erupted. Ruth Langsford actually shouted, Carol, in a tone of pure disbelief, while Janet Street Porter looked as if she was about to physically restrain her colleague. The audience, which had been sitting in stunned silence, began to boo and jeer, their anger finally boiling over. Michael Caine stopped. He turned back not just to Carol, but to the entire studio. For the first time since the assault began, his legendary composure showed the slightest of cracks, not of hurt, but of a profound, righteous anger finally stirred from its slumber. You know, Carol, he began, his voice suddenly infused with a new power that commanded absolute silence. "In all my years in this business, I have worked with some truly difficult people. I've had directors who screamed, producers who threatened, co-stars who were pathologically insecure. But I have never, not once in 7 decades of professional life, encountered someone with such a complete and utter lack of basic human decency." Carol's face, already flushed, seemed to burn even redder. "Basic human decency? You mean the kind of decency that lets mediocre has-beens keep taking jobs from young people who actually deserve them?" "No," Michael replied, his voice growing stronger, each word landing like a precision strike. "I mean the kind of decency that shows a modicum of respect for another human being, regardless of their age or profession. The kind that recognizes that experience and a lifetime of dedication to a craft might actually have some value. The kind that understands the fundamental difference between honest, constructive criticism and cruel, ignorant personal attacks." "Oh, spare me the sanctimonious lecture," Carol snapped, though a flicker of panic was now visible in her eyes. "You've been coasting on your reputation for years. Everyone in the industry knows it. I'm just the only one with the guts to say it to your face." Janet Street Porter had clearly had enough. "You're not being honest, Carol. You're being vicious, and you're making a fool of yourself. There's a difference." "Is there?" Carol turned on Janet now, deflecting. "Or are you all just too terrified to admit that the Emperor has no clothes? Michael Caine is finished. He just doesn't know it yet." It was at this precise moment that something shifted in Michael Caine's demeanor. The polite diplomatic facade didn't just crack. It fell away completely, revealing the hard-won confidence of a man who had survived poverty, war, and the brutal landscape of Hollywood. And for the first time he smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the sharp, dangerous smile of a man who had finally decided to remove his gloves. "You want to talk about being finished, Carol?" he said, his voice calm but laced with ice. "Let's talk about what you've just done to your own career. Right here." In the last 5 minutes, Carol McGiffin's smug expression faltered, a wave of uncertainty washing over her features before she quickly tried to rebuild her wall of defiance. "My career, please. I'm not the one desperately clinging to relevance here." "No, Carol, you are not," Michael agreed, his smile tightening. "You are the one who just immolated any credibility you might have had left live on national television. You see, I've been in this business long enough to recognize a very specific type of person. The kind who projects their own deepest insecurities onto others." "What's that supposed to mean?" Carol demanded, but the bravado in her voice had been replaced by a slight, unmistakable tremor. "It means," Michael said, taking a slow step back towards the panel, his presence utterly commanding, "that anyone with an ounce of sense watching this will see exactly what you are. A bitter, deeply insecure presenter whose own career has stalled, and who is now taking out her professional frustrations on a guest who has actually achieved something with their life. This isn't about me, Carol. This has never been about me. This is all about you." The other panelists watched the exchange with a mixture of horror and awe. Ruth looked like she wanted the floor to swallow her whole, while Janet and Colleen seemed torn between trying to intervene and watching Carol get the public dressing down. Many in the industry would argue she had deserved for years. "Hey, failed presenter," Carol's voice rose to a near shriek. "I have been on television for over 20 years. And what do you have to show for it?" Michael asked, his voice still deceptively calm. "A handful of appearances on panel shows where your primary contribution is to be professionally disagreeable. That's not a legacy, Carol. That's just a long-running public tantrum. You haven't built anything. You've just thrown rocks at those who have." Carol looked around wildly, her eyes darting between her colleagues, silently pleading for support. But she found none. Ruth was staring at her hands on the desk. Janet was shaking her head in disgust, and Colleen looked as if she was trying very hard not to applaud Michael's every word. You can't talk to me like that," Carol sputtered, her face crumpling. "Can't I?" Michael raised an eyebrow. "You seem to operate under the assumption that you can speak to me, a guest in this studio, however you please. What makes you so special, Carol, that the normal rules of civility and respect don't apply to you?" "I was just being honest about your work," she protested weakly. Her earlier confidence now completely evaporated, leaving behind a desperate, brittle defensiveness. Michael let out a short, genuine laugh, and it was somehow more devastating than any angry retort could have been. "Honest? Carol, my dear, you haven't said a single intelligent thing about my work. To be honest about someone's work, you have to actually know it. You've simply hurled playground insults about my age and my relevance. That isn't criticism. It's just bullying." "That's not true," Carol said, her voice cracking. "Isn't it?" Michael challenged, his eyes boring into hers. "Let me ask you something, Carol, since you're such an expert on my failing career. Have you seen my film, Youth, with Harvey Keitel? I received a European Film Award for Best Actor for that performance. Can you name the last 3 films I appeared in? Can you tell me anything specific about any of my performances in the last decade that you found lacking from a technical or artistic standpoint? Carol's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The silence stretched on, thick and uncomfortable, as it became painfully, humiliatingly clear to everyone in the studio and everyone watching at home that she had no answer. She hadn't done the research. Her entire attack was built on nothing but prejudice and hot air. I thought not, Michael said with quiet, devastating finality. You see, ladies and gentlemen, this is the perfect example of someone confusing having loud opinions with having actual knowledge. Carol doesn't know the first thing about my recent work. She simply decided that attacking an old legend would make her seem edgy and relevant. Her shortcut to having a personality, Ruth Langsford finally managed to speak, her voice thick with mortification. Sir Michael, on behalf of the show, I am so sorry about this. This is not how we conduct ourselves. This is not what Loose Women is about. Michael turned to Ruth, and the icy anger in his expression melted away instantly, replaced by genuine warmth and sympathy. Ruth, you have absolutely nothing to apologize for. You and Janet and Colleen have been nothing but professional and courteous. This reflects only on Carol, not on you and not on this program. Carol, now completely isolated and exposed, seemed to shrink in her chair. You're all ganging up on me now. Janet Street Porter finally exploded, her voice dripping with contempt. Ganging up on you? Ganging up on you? Carol, you have spent the last 10 minutes verbally abusing and humiliating an 87-year-old man, a beloved icon and our guest, for no reason whatsoever. What on earth did you expect would happen? That we give you a round of applause? I expected to have an honest conversation instead of the usual fawning nonsense. Carol shot back, but her voice lacked all its earlier venom. It was the desperate cry of someone who knew they had gone too far and could not find their way back. Michael Caine picked up his suit jacket from the back of his chair and calmly began to put it on. Carol, let me offer you some free advice from someone who has actually managed to make a living in this business for 70 years. An honest conversation requires a foundation of respect. It requires knowledge, not just ignorance. And it requires a certain generosity of spirit, something which you clearly know nothing about. Fine, Carol said desperately, trying one last pathetic gambit. Go on then, leave. Prove my point that you can't handle criticism. Michael paused, his jacket halfway on. He looked directly at Carol, not with anger now, but with something closer to pity. When he spoke, his voice was quiet again, but it carried to every corner of the silent watching studio. Carol, what you did here today wasn't criticism. Criticism comes from a place of knowledge and a desire to improve. What you did was a public display of your own character, and frankly it wasn't a very flattering one. He then turned to the other panelists, his warm smile returning. Ruth, Janet, Colleen, thank you again for a lovely morning. I'm only sorry it ended on such a sour note. As Michael moved towards the studio exit, Carol, in a final desperate spasm of self-destruction, called out, "That's right, Michael! Walk away, just like I said you would." Michael stopped at the edge of the set. He turned back one last time, his gaze sweeping over Carol, the stunned panel, and the silent audience. "I'm not walking away from criticism. Carol," he said, his voice imbued with a lifetime of quiet dignity, "I welcome it. It's how I've improved for 70 years. I'm walking away from cruelty. I'm walking away from an empty, bitter void. There's a difference, though I suspect for your sake that you'll never truly understand what it is." With that, Sir Michael Caine turned and walked off the Loose Women set, his head held high, his dignity not just intact but magnified. The cameras continued to roll, zooming in on Carol McGiffin's face, now pale and frozen in a mask of stunned silence, as the sheer cataclysmic scale of what she had just done began to dawn on her. Ruth Langsford, her face grim, looked directly into camera one. We'll be right back after this break, but everyone in that studio, everyone in the production gallery, and everyone watching at home knew that some things couldn't be fixed by a commercial break. In a few short minutes of breathtaking arrogance and unprovoked cruelty, Carol McGiffin had revealed to the world exactly who she was. And Sir Michael Caine, who had walked into that studio, a respected actor, had left as something even more valuable. A man who had met ugliness with grace, and in doing so, reminded everyone what true class really looks like. The moment the floor manager yelled, "And we're clear! 2 minutes, people!" a switch flipped in the studio. The forced on-air composure of the remaining panelists shattered, and the manufactured calm of the set was replaced by a maelstrom of raw, unvarnished fury. The live audience, released from the spell of broadcast silence, erupted into a cacophony of angry chatter, with words like disgraceful, bully, And how dare she, cutting through the noise. Ruth Langsford ripped out her earpiece and slammed it onto the desk with a force that made the mugs jump. She rounded on Carol, her face a mask of cold professional rage. What in God's name was that, Carol? What were you thinking? Carol, who was still staring at the empty space where Michael Caine had been, flinched as if struck. I was just asking the questions no one else dares to, she stammered, the bravado gone, her voice thin and reedy. Questions. Janet Street Porter was on her feet now, leaning over the desk, her voice a low, vicious hiss. Those weren't questions, you stupid, arrogant woman. That was a character assassination. You didn't just insult him. You insulted every single person watching. You insulted this show, and you made us all look like accomplices in your petty, pathetic little psychodrama. He's not beyond criticism, Carol protested, her eyes darting around, looking for an ally, a friendly face, anything. She found nothing but condemnation. Colleen Nolan, who had been quietly crying, finally spoke, her voice thick with disappointment. But that wasn't criticism, Carol. It was just mean. It was cruel. He came here to be our guest. He's 87 years old. Why would you want to be so deliberately unkind to anyone, let alone him? He's not a child. He can handle it. Carol shot back, her voice rising with a note of hysteria. Of course he can handle it. Janet snarled. He's Michael Bloody Caine. He's handled a hell of a lot worse than a second-rate television presenter with a chip on her shoulder. The question isn't whether he can handle it. It's whether we can. Whether this show can. The floor manager, a harried-looking man named Dave, rushed onto the set, his headset clamped to his ear. He looked frantically at Ruth. The gallery is going insane. The exec producer wants to talk to Carol, now in her office. They're pulling her for the rest of the show. Good, Ruth said, not even looking at Carol. You can't do that. Carol cried, a genuine panic finally breaking through. You can't just take me off air. We're not doing it, Carol, they are, Ruth said, gesturing upwards towards the gallery. You've brought the entire network into disrepute in the space of 10 minutes. What did you think was going to happen? Two formidable-looking production assistants appeared at Carol's side. They didn't touch her, but their presence was an unmistakable signal. It was over. Humiliated, her face a blotchy mess of red and white. Carol McGiffin stood up, pushed her chair back violently, and allowed herself to be escorted off the set through a side door, avoiding the shocked and angry gaze of the audience. 1 minute back, Dave yelled. Ruth, Janet, and Colleen looked at each other in sheer panic. There was an empty chair at the end of the desk. They had another hour of live television to get through. What do we do? Colleen whispered, wiping her eyes. Ruth took a deep, steadying breath, the consummate professional kicking back into gear. We do our jobs. I'll make a statement. We apologize. And then we move on to the bloody cooking segment. And we smile. She looked at her colleagues, her eyes hard. We smile if it kills us. The countdown started. 10, 9, 8. Ruth put her earpiece back in, smoothed her jacket, and fixed her gaze on camera 1. The upbeat theme music played again, but this time it sounded jarring, almost obscene after the raw emotion of the preceding moments. 3, 2, 1. Ruth's face appeared on millions of screens, her expression somber and serious. Welcome back to Loose Women, she began, her voice steady. Before we move on, I want to sincerely and on behalf of the entire show apologize to our guest, Sir Michael Caine, and to all of you watching at home for the conversation that took place before the break. The line of questioning pursued by one of our panelists was deeply inappropriate, disrespectful, and does not reflect the views of myself, the rest of the panel, or of ITV. We have the utmost respect for Sir Michael, and we are mortified that his appearance on our show was tainted in such a way. We have extended our deepest apologies to him and his team personally. We will now be continuing with the rest of the show. It was a masterclass in crisis management delivered under impossible pressure. But as they transitioned awkwardly into a segment about the best way to roast a chicken, the atmosphere was funereal. The empty chair at the end of the panel was a gaping wound, a silent testament to the self-immolation that had just occurred. Meanwhile, the digital world had exploded. The clip, recorded and uploaded to social media by thousands of viewers, went viral with a speed that was breathtaking. The hashtags, I Stand With Michael Caine and Sack McGiffin, were trending worldwide within 15 minutes. Twitter, or X as it was now known, was a torrent of outrage. Celebrities, fellow actors, directors, and the general public were united in a rare, singular voice of condemnation for Carol and overwhelming support for Michael. Piers Morgan tweeted, I'm known for being controversial, but what Carol McGiffin did to Michael Caine was not television. It was a public mugging. Vile, unprofessional, and career suicide. He showed more class in his little finger than she's shown in her entire life. Stephen Fry posted, to watch a man of Sir Michael Caine's stature, a true gentleman of the arts, be subjected to such ignorant and cruel abuse is a depressing sign of our times. Grace, it seems, is in short supply. He, however, has it in abundance. The memes were already appearing. Michael Caine's face on the "and I took that personally" meme from The Last Dance. Carol's face photoshopped into a boxing ring, getting knocked out by Alfred from The Dark Knight. The incident had transcended a mere TV spat. It had become a cultural moment, a morality play about decency versus cruelty, about legacy versus fleeting notoriety. Backstage at ITV, the fallout was just beginning. In the executive producer's office, a grim-faced Sarah Connolly sat opposite Carol McGiffin. A man from ITV's legal department was also present, his briefcase on his lap. "I don't think you understand the gravity of this situation, Carol," Sarah said, her voice devoid of any warmth. "The switchboard has melted. Our social media is a toxic waste dump. We are getting emails from major advertisers threatening to pull their campaigns. You haven't just had a bad segment. You have single-handedly created the biggest PR disaster for this network in a decade." "I was just being provocative. It's what the show is about," Carol insisted, though her voice trembled. "No," the lawyer interjected calmly. "The show is about discussing topical issues. Your contract has a clause about bringing the program and the broadcaster into disrepute. What you did out there was a clear and egregious breach of that clause. You didn't critique a film. You launched a sustained personal and ageist attack on a guest. So what happens now?" Carol asked, her voice barely a whisper. "What happens now," Sarah said, picking up a letter from her desk, "is that you are suspended, without pay, effective immediately, pending a full internal investigation. You are not to give any interviews or make any public statements. You are to hand over your ITV security pass before you leave the building." The finality of it hit Carol like a physical blow. She slumped in her chair, the fight finally draining out of her. Miles away, in a quiet suite at the Dorchester Hotel, Sir Michael Caine was sipping a cup of tea. His publicist, a sharp, impeccably dressed woman named Amelia, was pacing the room, her phone buzzing incessantly. Every paper, every news channel, every blog. "They all want a statement," Amelia said. "The Guardian's TV critic has already published a piece calling it a career-defining moment of grace for Caine and a career-ending moment of disgrace for his inquisitor." Michael smiled faintly. "Poor woman," he said quietly. Amelia stopped pacing and stared at him. "Poor woman?" "Michael, she tried to publicly humiliate you, and in doing so she has ruined herself," he replied, placing his cup down. "There is no victory in that, Amelia, only sadness. She is clearly a very unhappy person. You don't lash out like that from a place of contentment." He looked at her. "Tell them this. Sir Michael was disappointed by the tone of the interview, but he holds no ill will. He has been in the public eye long enough to know that it comes with both bouquets and brickbats. He considers the matter closed and wishes everyone at Loose Women the very best. And that's all we'll say." Amelia smiled. "That's perfect. It's classy. It's the truth," Michael said. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I believe I have a book to promote. And I'm rather looking forward to a nice, quiet lunch." He had survived the ambush. He had not only defended his dignity, but enhanced his reputation. He would be fine. But for Carol McGiffin, now sitting in a taxi in stunned, tearful silence as it pulled away from the ITV studios, the future looked bleak. She had gambled everything on a moment of shocking television, believing it would make her a star. Instead, she had become a pariah, in her desperate attempt to prove that Michael Caine was irrelevant. She had succeeded only in making herself completely and irrevocably so. The week that followed the incident was a slow-motion car crash for what was left of Carol McGiffin's career. The internal investigation at ITV was, as most industry insiders predicted, a mere formality. The evidence wasn't a matter of he said, she said. It was a high-definition, multi-angle recording of a professional implosion that had been broadcast to millions. Advertisers had indeed followed through on their threats, pulling six-figure sums from the show's ad slots and demanding assurances that such a brand-damaging event would never happen again. The network's Standards and Practices Department had logged over 50,000 complaints from the public within 48 hours, a record for the broadcaster. On the following Monday, exactly 6 days after she had been escorted from the building, Carol was summoned back to ITV studios for one final meeting. She wasn't led to the executive producer's office this time, but to a sterile, anonymous meeting room in the corporate wing, a part of the building she had never been in before. Across a polished mahogany table sat Sarah Connolly, the lawyer from the week before, and a senior executive from Human Resources. There was no small talk. Sarah slid a single sheet of paper across the table. "Carol, the investigation is complete. As expected, it found you guilty of gross misconduct and a severe breach of contract. This letter is the formal termination of your employment with ITV, effective immediately. Carol looked at the letter, but the words swam before her eyes. Gross misconduct? I was expressing an opinion. This is a cancellation. The lawyer sighed, a sound of pure weariness. Carol, this isn't about cancellation. This is about consequences. You ambushed a guest. You were personally abusive. You ignored repeated instructions from the show's anchor to desist. You damaged the reputation of a program that employs over 100 people. An opinion is saying I didn't care for his last film. What you did was an unprofessional tirade. They are not the same thing. So that's it? After 20 years, it's just over? She asked, her voice hollow. That's it, Sarah confirmed, her tone final. The security team will escort you to your dressing room to clear out your personal belongings. As Carol was led through the now unfamiliar corridors, she passed a television monitor in the reception area. On the screen was Loose Women, live on air. In her old chair sat a smiling guest panelist. Ruth, Janet and Colleen were laughing at a joke, the on-air chemistry already beginning to heal. The show had moved on. The machine hadn't even stuttered. She wasn't a missing part. She was just a faulty one that had been replaced. In the days that followed, Carol attempted a desperate media campaign to salvage her reputation. She gave a single tearful interview to a tabloid newspaper, the headline screaming, "I was bullied out of my job for telling the truth." The TV interview they don't want you to see. In the article, she painted herself as a victim of the establishment, a brave truth-teller silenced for daring to challenge a powerful man. It backfired spectacularly. The public, having seen the actual interview, flooded the newspaper's comment sections with ridicule. They saw not a brave truth-teller but a bitter bully playing the victim. She was offered no other mainstream interviews. The phone stopped ringing. Her agent, after a week of having his calls to producers, met with polite but firm rejections, quietly informed her that it would be best if they parted ways. Meanwhile, for Sir Michael Caine, the incident had the opposite effect. It acted as a cultural rocket booster for his legacy. Sales of his memoir, The Long Shot, tripled overnight, propelling it to the top of the bestseller lists in both the UK and the US. The publisher ordered an emergency reprint of 500,000 copies. Young people who knew him only as Alfred from Batman were now discovering his classic films, from Alfie to Get Carter. The viral clip of his dignified, devastating shutdown of Carol had turned him into an icon for a new generation, a symbol of grace under pressure. He was inundated with offers, not just for films, but for prestigious speaking engagements and lifetime achievement awards. He had become, through no action of his own, more relevant than he had been in 20 years. The end of the story came not with a bang, but with the quiet, inexorable turning of the media wheel. 6 months later, Carol McGiffin launched a podcast. It was called Uncancelled. From a makeshift studio in her spare bedroom, she would rail against woke culture, the mainstream media, and the celebrity elite. Her audience was small but vocal, a self-contained echo chamber of the aggrieved. She was no longer a national broadcaster. She was a niche content creator, her voice a bitter whisper in the vast, noisy wilderness of the internet. Around the same time, Sir Michael Caine stood on stage at the BAFTA Awards in London's Royal Albert Hall. He was there to receive the Fellowship Award, the highest honour the Academy could bestow. The entire auditorium, filled with the brightest stars of the film and television industry, gave him a thunderous 5-minute standing ovation. As he stood at the podium, frail but radiating an undiminished aura of charm and authority, he looked out at the sea of admiring faces. "You know," he began, his voice carrying that familiar, comforting cadence, "a while back, someone suggested that perhaps I was past my sell-by date, that it was time for me to step aside." A ripple of knowing laughter went through the audience, and I gave it some thought. But then I looked at the wonderful scripts that are still coming my way, at the brilliant young directors and actors I still have the privilege to work with. And I thought, to hell with that. The hall erupted in applause and cheers. He smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached the back of the room. "The secret," he continued, leaning into the microphone, "is to just keep going, to do the work, to be professional, to be kind. Because in the end, the work is what lasts. The stories we tell, the characters we create, all the rest of it. All the noise and the nastiness, it's just temporary, it fades. But a good story, told with honesty and a bit of heart, that lasts forever." He held the gleaming award aloft, a symbol of a lifetime of dedication. He hadn't needed to crush his attacker. He had simply outlasted her. His legacy, a towering monument of artistic achievement, hers a footnote in a forgotten news cycle. Carol McGiffin had sought to create a moment of television. Michael Caine, by simply being himself, had proven that character is what defines a lifetime.